Okay, so Bill Gates said that these banks are dinosaurs and they're going to be supplanted. So what do you think, Dave? Are they going to be supplanted by fintech companies?
I think it's interesting because he said that people don't need banks, they need banking.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that is kind of where the shift is going. I can't think of anybody who enjoys lining up at a brick and mortar bank and just waiting in line. And even the employees that work there, that's not a pleasant experience. And so any kind of friction that exists, I think, one approach that entrepreneurs take is trying to minimize that kind of friction, whatever it may be. And so I think going back to Bill Gates' quote, as well as that really interesting information about how banks have become bigger and more profitable and larger in scale, part of that is, I think, a continuation of just the wave of efficiency that we've seen throughout history, right? As technology evolves, be it from steam power or electricity or whatever it is, then there is eventually some pressure that's put on existing cost structures.
Yeah. And
things, in theory, should become more efficient. And I think as new technology comes into play, I think many of banks are... One reason they are trying to absorb some of this technology is to reduce costs. Part of that comes from a cost efficiency where they're laying off people. Part of that is trying to find technological solutions to allow them to lay off more people.
Yeah.
And I think that's led to some of the scale and profitability that I think that you're initially referring to.
Which does get to some of our points about the idea that one of the ways that companies are becoming more efficient, either through fintech or just technology generally, is by essentially letting go of people, right? Which is an ethical question, an overarching question for this course in and of itself. And just to highlight the point, the research where they did show the growth of the industry, the financial industry from 1994 to 2018, did show that a lot of that financial growth was, I guess, helped by the fact that there were actually significantly fewer actual bank entities, right? Meaning like the brick and mortar shops and things, right?
And I think a lot of this technological evolution, there'll be a lot of stuff we can't see as data to consumers. But the point that we'll all be able to see is there'll probably be less and less physical presences. So going back to this point about all the great experiences you had lining up at a traditional bank, that experience will be hopefully less and less.
And they've used fintech to actually push people away from that experience. So a lot of the accounts that you'll see, like I have accounts right now that will actually charge you if you go into the bank, whereas they'll let you do like online banking in an unlimited amount for free, generally speaking, right? They'll let you go into the bank a certain number of times before they charge you. And so over the past decade, they've actually like affirmatively been pushing people away from a business model perspective. I think the first example that I had from this, the first non-brick and mortar bank that I worked with was something called ING Direct, where they had like this orange account and there was no physical location anywhere in the world. At the time, this was quite revolutionary. They were able to keep very, very low cost banking and therefore give you better interest rates. And I remember even before I had moved out of the US, I was banking through this kind of external system. But it leads me to another question then.
But the interesting about that is that ING Direct was tied to a traditional financial company.
Correct. That's exactly my point, right? So the point that I'm now asking is, okay, so for those of you that are kind of viewing fintech, blockchain, Bitcoin, whatever, as this decentralizing, democratizing institution, or the fact that fintech is actually going to pull away at the sources, the traditional sources of power, my question for you then, is that kind of a false vision of the future, and are we instead just seeing a retrenching of existing power bases, especially within the financial industry? And as a quick example, so I think a week or two ago, JP Morgan recently announced their own kind of foray into cryptocurrency, right? There's so many examples of this. Obviously, online banking was not started by non-banks, right? Those are banks that did it. So what do you think?
Yeah, and I don't think those paths are necessarily mutually exclusive, to be honest. I think banks, in their current form, have existing customer bases. They obviously have technology that can scale. A lot of the investments that many large commercial and international kind of investment banks are making are into enhancing technology, right? Their ability to do certain things. So that could either be in-house development or through acquisitions. So I think that will continue. And as an entrepreneur, you may have this vision, right, about we want to produce something, but ultimately, if someone comes knocking and like, hey, we want to acquire this technology to bolt it onto something we're doing, that can be a very attractive proposition for an entrepreneur, right? And so I think a lot of the technologies will find themselves into established players, and so part of that will be established players being molded, so to speak, by this new influx of technology. But I think to some of the stuff we discussed earlier, there's going to be a whole host of non-traditional financial players or institutions who also kind of get into the game. And perhaps one example of that is like PayPal, right?
Sure.
A lot of people look at PayPal as kind of the first big domino in the sense of trying to get into this payment space that had been particularly dominated by kind of more mature players, not so savvy with technology, really didn't have necessarily a worldview of how they wanted to institute or employ technology in the work they were doing. And so I think we'll see a bit of that or a combination of both. I don't think those are mutually exclusive paths, but increasingly I do think we'll see, again, non-financial players who, based on their user bases, roll out financial institutions themselves. So another interesting example from our part of the world in Asia is one of the large social messaging platforms in Asia is a Korean application called Kakao Talk. And about a year or two ago, they rolled out Kakao Bank, which is effectively online. There's a few physical presences, but almost overwhelmingly, it's online only. And as a result, their cost structure is vastly different than a traditional bank. And so in this particular situation for Kakao Bank, the online user acquisition, kind of the growth was rapid.
Yeah.
And they were able to offer much more competitive fees, rates, and other products to customers that otherwise would have had to only go to a brick and mortar bank.
Yeah, and so we're seeing that in other, certainly a lot of the Chinese apps as well, not so much on the cost side, but from the efficiency standpoint.